Welcome to this session, and we'll have 4 presentations, 2 formal presentations, and then we'll give you the opportunity to interact. We would like this session to be as much interactive as possible, and then I don't have the opportunity to introduce all the presenters, so I'll ask them before beginning the presentation to introduce themselves. So as Barack mentioned, this breakout session will be about internet security tools and DNS security tools. It is it's technical, but it will be soft. So the presenters, they are very experienced people, and then they know how to help us to understand what they are going to deliver. So I'll give the floor to the first presenter, Dan from Internet Society. So you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm going to just stand up a little bit because I would like to just stand and walk a little bit here. So, as Yvonne said, to introduce myself, I work for the Internet Society. I've been with the Internet Society for about 4 years now. My focus is around the security and how we work with our systems. I've been part of a program. How many of you have heard of the Deploy 360 program that the Internet Society's had? Okay, a couple hands. It's a program we've created. It allows us to go and help accelerate the deployment of some key technologies. But today, I'm here to talk a bit about how we go and bring about a more secure internet and a more trusted one. Because really, this is what we're about, is how do we create a level of trust in the internet and trust in the information that we receive from the internet about this. And this is a very real challenge. I want to just mention one issue that's been going on for a while now, where the Computer Emergency Response Team at Carnegie Mellon was documenting that a certain amount of the email on the internet is actually being redirected to somebody else. They weren't actually able to identify who, but that party was going and looking at the email, whatever else, delivering it on. But it was all being done through DNS by hijacking the mail exchange records, the MX records that are part of this. So what we want to talk about here is something called DNSSEC, or DNS security extensions. How many people have worked with DNSSEC who are in here? Okay, a couple hands. How many people have a signed domain? Okay, a couple ones in there. All right, yeah, good thing for this panel, yes. Well, let's talk a little bit about what this does and why this is important. If you think about how DNS normally works, when we take our web browser, just as an example, and we go and we type in some name, we want to go to whatever that site may be, we're going and that our application is first going out to DNS to find out what's the IP address I need to connect to. All right, so it's going out and doing that. So what happens, as the example shows, is that I go and I say, what's my address? It comes back, I connect to the website, and I go from there. This is how DNS works. Now, the reality of what's actually happening is it's going from our resolver out to the different things, going up to the root, right? Going to a TLD, a top-level domain, going on from there down to the actual piece. This is what happens, you know, millions, trillions of times each day for every single interaction that we do. This is what's going on, and this is part of it. The challenge is the DNS works on speed. Whoever gets the answer back to the resolver first is the answer that gets passed along. And this creates a big opportunity for an attacker to try to get in the middle and to try to do something like this, where they go and they provide their answer faster than the regular answers that you would get out of there. And this creates this challenge where an attacker can get in there and give false information. Now, the big problem with this is that that information is cached, as we call it. It's stored on that DNS resolver, which could be running on your mobile phone, it could be running on your laptop, it could be anywhere else. That information stays for some period of time. So we have a poisoned cache, as we call it, a way that's here like this. It stays in there. So really, our trust in DNS kind of looks like this. Anybody want to buy a car? All right. We have an untrusted DNS right now. All right? We cannot trust the answers that come out of DNS. When I go and I want to go to internetsociety.org, I'm trusting the DNS to give me the right answer, but it might not. Now, maybe going to Internet Society may not be as big of a deal, but if I'm trying to get to my bank or the government's website or some other different site, this could be a big case and could lead to a case where I wind up giving information that could be used for identity theft or for other reasons like this. So we want to add a layer of trust to DNS. And that's what we do with this thing called DNSSEC. What DNSSEC does is it adds in a signature, cryptographic signature on here, a way of signing your domain so that the answers that come out are signed. Now, it has two parts. The other part is that at your ISP or on your laptop or your device or your application, you're checking those signatures, right? Because if you have signatures but you're not checking them, what's the point? You've got to do both parts of this. And this is what DNSSEC is about. It's about getting people to check for signatures and getting domains signed. So let me show you what that looks like here. With DNSSEC, you would go through the standard process, but as you see over here in the circled part, when you get information back, you would also get some extra records called a DNS key and an RRSIG, but some extra records that would come back. All right? And those are the signature that lets you go and know what exactly is happening here. Now, there's also some other records that tie this all together into what we call a global chain of trust, so that an attacker can't spoof the signature, because an attacker could try, right? Instead, what we're going to do is tie these pieces all together so that if an attacker tries to get in there, what will happen is that the resolver will say, no, Mr. Attacker or Mrs. Attacker, that isn't correct, that doesn't match up. I'm going to send back saying I can't get there. All right? It'll protect you from going to sites that are here. This is what DNSSEC is about. Allowing you to trust the answers that come out of DNS. Okay, it's telling you these are the IP addresses that you wanted, or they're not. They're telling you what this is. It ensures that the information that each of you put into DNS as your DNS operator is the same information that somebody else gets out. This is what DNSSEC is about. There's two parts to it, as I mentioned. There's a signing side to make those signatures, and there's the validation side. The validation side is actually easier. Each of you could conceivably go home and turn on validation, maybe, in your networks. Depends upon how much control you have over what's in your home network. But internet service providers, operators, network operators, can turn on DNSSEC validation for their networks. And we're seeing this around the region and around the world. In the United States, we've had several large, where I live, there have been several large operators such as Comcast who turned on DNSSEC validation for their 20 million subscribers. We have network operators across Europe who have done this as well in various different regions too. So the validating side enables checking of the signatures. The signing side involves a couple other parties. There's the DNS hosting operator, or whoever's running the DNS for your domain. They have to sign it. Sometimes that's part of a registrar. Sometimes it's a separate entity. But registrars have to get involved. I have a little chart that shows this too. And ultimately the registry has to be involved as well. We've talked a bit, and we've heard many of the CCTLDs here in Africa still have not signed their top level domain, their TLD, and so people cannot really make use of DNSSEC below that. So the first step is the registry needs to sign the TLD, and then beneath that, registrars and hosting operators need to go and provide the signing mechanisms. Now it gets a little bit more complicated here, but this is the basic idea of what has to be done. So there's two steps to DNSSEC: validation, checking signatures, and then signing. Everyone can start validating. You can do that today, your network can, and that will start checking signatures that are happening around the rest of the world. And then as your TLD starts to enable the signing, we can go on from there. We're going to talk more on Wednesday. If you're interested to know where countries are in Africa and around the world, Wednesday morning at the DNSSEC workshop here as part of the ICANN meeting, we will be talking about statistics and information about what's happening here. I want to just basically touch on one aspect before I turn it over to my colleagues here. Once we have DNSSEC and we have signed domains, signed information out of DNS, we can do other interesting things. For instance, how do we know when I go to my bank's website and I get a certificate and I get my little lock in my browser icon? How do I know that I'm really going to that bank's website? How do I know I'm using the correct certificate? The reality is that many different certificate authorities can go and sign TLS certificates, what we used to call SSL. There's a new mechanism called DANE, which is RFC 6698. I'll have a chart here in a moment that says this. But what it lets us do is it lets us put a TLS certificate or a fingerprint of a certificate into DNS, lets us go and secure it with DNSSEC and be able to know that is the certificate that I want you to use for this domain. It could be used in web browsing, it could be used in email, it could be used in other places like that. There's a good bit of this work happening going on. This is something called DANE. If you'd like more information, this presentation will be available online. You can also go to the Internet Society's Deploy 360 site, and there's some information right there about DANE, and there's some other pieces here. I could talk more about it, but I know some of the other presentations are going to talk a bit more about what this does. So I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. DNSSEC is important for a couple of key reasons for businesses and for others. It brings this level of trust to be sure that we can trust the information we're getting out of DNS, and it also lets people trust that the information I'm putting in gets out to them. It provides a higher level of security. It provides a level of innovation. The pieces we're seeing with DNSSEC, or with DANE, with the pieces that are out there, and this confidentiality. DANE lets us add this layer of trust to TLS, to SSL, to e-commerce, to let us go and see what's happening there. I said before, there we go. I have 3 requests for you all. One is, if you can go back and talk to your IT team or network operator about starting validating DNSSEC. Start checking signatures. Even if your domain isn't signed yet, you can start checking signatures today. My second request, it is number 2. You sign your domains if you can. Sign them, start looking at that process, understand what you can do with that. And the third is, learn more about this thing called DANE. Help encourage it. Some of the browser vendors have been reluctant to add it in part because they said nobody wants it, the traditional statement like that. So we're encouraging people to start wanting it, talking about it, understanding what it does, do all of those things. At the Internet Society, we have a number of resources available, and if you go to internetsociety.org/deploy360, you'll see a wide range of case studies, statistics, documentation, tutorials, pieces that are there related to DNSSEC and IPv6 and other technologies. But that's what's available there. And with that, I will say thank you. You can reach me at York, Y-O-R-K, at ISOC.org. I'll also be available here for further questions as we go through this. Thank you, and I hope to see more signed domains.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll have time for Q&A. And so if you have, I'm sure you have some questions for Dan. But after the presentation, the order presentation, will come back to that session of Q&A. Now I'm going to give the floor to Choolwe, who is from .zm. He's going to talk about internet security tools. So you have the floor, Choolwe.
Thank you very much. The president has been set to stand up, so I'm going to stand up. My name is Choolwe Nalubamba. I'm from .zm. and I will try and talk about internet security tools. It is no small topic, but I'll try and cover the basics. If you do want to talk, if you want to go deeper in the technologies, you can contact me. So basically I'll talk about the importance of layered security, monitoring, prevention, detection, and then backup. Okay? When talking about layered security, one of the important things to note is that more is always better than less. There are only a few instances where less is better than more. Those of you who are good with Linux will know that less is a much better command than more. But in security, you have to put layer upon layer because you have no solution that is silver bullet where you can rely on completely. Okay, so when we talk about layer security, what I'm talking about is if you have your TLD or whatever system you are running, your DNS, your name servers, okay, one of the first things you have to do is backup. This is because it is inevitable that you're going to get hacked. You're going to get breached. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. The systems are going to get breached. You ever met people who tell you, oh, can you give me your phone number? My phone was stolen, so I don't have my contacts. I always say, duh, it's because you don't have backup. Okay, you should have backup. There is nothing you can do in place of backup. There's not a single thing you can do, whether technical or spiritual, okay, in place of backup. You should have backup. Just the other day I was having a chat with my colleague from TZ to say I do have backup in country and out of the country, but I would want to have another backup. You know, so I want to back up their backup somewhere else. Okay? After you've done your backup, you also want to be able to have the capacity to detect an attack. In security, we say prevention is key, but detection is a must. When we're talking about detection, we're not talking about only detecting successful attacks. We run intrusion detection systems at the office that also detect failed attempts. Sometimes you want to know that this person is trying too hard and how they are trying. So you want to detect attacks as well. And of course you want to implement some intrusion prevention systems. We'll talk about the tools just now. You want to be able to stop attacks. I don't know, by show of hands, is there anyone running a TLD on a Windows environment? Not hating on Windows, but anyone running TLD on Windows? Okay? Yeah, I was going to get shocked. But anyway, when you're talking about prevention, you also have to build several tools. You cannot rely on one. One of the things that we talk about in security is you do not want to be a slave of a particular tool. Okay? And of course you want to monitor. And the monitoring here, you want to monitor that your systems are running the way they should be running. Here we're talking about a fuel gauge. For example, you want to see how you're running. We implemented DNSSEC only late last year, and the monitoring we were doing was pretty much manual. Okay? And you are bound to make a mistake. So you want to use tools that will help you monitor to see that your zones are being signed and things like that. There's a management principle that there's no need for you to get a dog if you intend to do the barking yourself. Okay? Which means that in monitoring as well, and all these things we're talking about here, you should be able to employ tools that will help you. that will give you an interface that is easier for you to understand. Okay? So to give you an example of what layered security is, I live in a pretty good neighborhood, but they are surrounded by people that are not pretty good. So first thing you do is, of course, build a wall fence, and on that wall fence, because some people are very acrobatic and will easily jump over, okay, you put an electric fence so that you stop them from jumping over. But if they succeed, if in my house, in my particular situation, if they do manage to leap over the fence, they're going to find two big South African mastiffs. They're also called boabos. Okay? And if they manage to subdue those, I've got a grill gate, and then inside, okay, they would have to come and deal with the owner who has an armory. Okay? So that's defense in depth, and that's layered security. You cannot just say, I have an antivirus, I have a firewall, I have a SIM, okay, and I'm set. Okay, so looking at some of the tools for monitoring, for example, and I learned this from my colleague from Tanzania. Of course, you can run things like Nagios, OpenNMS, Splunk. One of the reasons why I've put Nagios there is that it will also do, instead of just monitoring hosts, you can actually go to the level of monitoring a service, and we're talking about either DNS, DNSSEC, and how regularly you're assigning your and uploading or transferring your zones. So you can, these are just some of the tools that you can look at. We can talk about them in more detail if you like. I want to talk about prevention as well. You may have noticed I'm pretty much heavy on open source. So I have some proprietary tools there, but I pretty much talk about open source. So we're talking about Snort, which will do both prevention and detection. We're talking about Cisco tools, IP tables. When we had the secure registry operation course last year, we actually taught some of these tools. And of course, you're talking about Snort, you're talking about Bro for detection, TCB dump, and then you can add scripting to that capability so that you don't have to do the things manually. Okay? And of course, when it comes to backup, if you are Linux heavy, we're talking about SCP, rsync, you can do AXFR and all those. Okay? So basically, this is what we propose when you're looking at securing your infrastructure. Now, this is on an individual TLD or your own infrastructure. When we're talking about working in partnerships, okay, the biggest problem then becomes that if you don't adhere to best practice, okay, you will be the weakest link of the chain. You will be the paperclip in the chain. So we all have to adhere to good practice in order for Africa or African partnerships when it comes to DNS to succeed. Okay, so the takeaways, for example, is layered security, defense in depth, also use a SIM so that you have an easier interface to see what's going on. And of course, prevention is key, but make sure you detect both successful and unsuccessful attacks. We basically have to work together. And with that, I will say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Choolwe. And now we are going to hear from Alain Aina, who is also going to talk about DNSSEC and also program the DNS Roadshow. And he'll give also an overview of the situation in Africa regarding the signature of the zone for the various CCTLDs. Let's hear from Alain Aina. Alain.
Okay, thank you, Yaovi, and I think I will switch to French so that you guys hear some French, because I think Simon also is going to speak in English, and so we'll make it a bit fair. So,
my name is Alain Patrick Aina, and not Ayana, as my colleague said. But we need to sort out this problem between Ayana and Ina, and we're going to use this meeting to do so. As far as DNSSEC, I'm not going to repeat what Dan said, and what my friend from Zambia also has said. I'm going to stick to what he said. He showed the various layers, and I'm going to build on the monitoring layer and say that next to this layer we also need processes in order to ensure that we can start working after the troubles. I'm saying that because since 2013, with ICANN, Yaovi and Pierre, we launched a campaign on the continent to encourage our CC operators to adopt DNSSEC. Some came on board, and during this pilgrimage we encountered some problems. Last year we had a problem in Kenya, and in December during Christmas time there was an incident also in Botswana. And personally, the lesson that I've drawn from that is that when we encountered those problems, our friends started to panic very, very quickly, and the following actions were not appropriate. Some reacted and said, we're going to launch the process at the level of IANA in order to withdraw the NS. But in both cases, solving the problem at the level of the zone was easier than to launch the IANA procedure. But because of lack of preparation in view of an incident, the first reaction is to say that, as we always said, you become a DNSSEC when you have the DS at the level of the route. So the reaction is to withdraw the DS. The procedure at the IANA level is that one needs to become used to that. That includes the validations. And in some cases, you make a request to withdraw the DS, and you are sent a mail in order to approve the request. But if the DNSSEC doesn't work, you don't have any mail anymore. So you are in a situation, in a closed situation. And so what are you going to do? So IANA will suggest to you to validate another email address, but that takes time. So we say to ourselves, so what is the problem? We have a problem with assigning a module. Do you have the copy of the keys? Yes, I do. So bring the key and we can restore the zone. And through that we were able to stop the IANA process. So I just wanted to emphasize that, just to say that to deploy DNSSEC, to deploy DNSSEC, we need the monitoring and measures in place in order to manage incidents. Because incidents will happen, and we must try to prevent what we have experienced last year. And with Yaovi, we started some work. We called the CCT, the African CCTLDs, to discuss about the measures that the CCs have in place for the management of the business, and to be able to continue working after an incident. So we need a DNSSEC to establish trust, to bring about security, and all that has to be put in place in order to not have the reverse effect. Because those that encounter this incident find it very difficult to convince the community of the good of the DNSSEC. So we need to draw from the experiences. We have the necessary resources to help people, and in the same line, I must say that for the last two days, we see a DNSSEC smoke, may I say, in Sierra Leone. However, if you look at those that are in the room, go to SL. SL is broken currently. There's some servers that have DNSSEC records. So this L could disappear if we don't do something. Look at the .sl. So Sierra Leone. So I invite everyone to look at that, to accept the principles. There's many resources that are available, such as Internet Society, so that we can have various opinions and get help in the process, so that when we have a DNSSEC in place, we can really use it to establish trust and avoid further problems. I'm going to stop here, and I thank you.
To come back to some experiences and how we can share best practices. So I'll give the floor to Balthazar, and then as Alain said, we are very lucky this afternoon. We have people in Africa, we have people in the community. So the panelists here, I think you know them. If you don't know them, I invite you to see them after the session, and there are resources for the community. So let's keep communicating with them. So I'll give the floor to Balthazar for the last presentation. Thank you, Balthazar.
Thank you, Yaovi. Good afternoon. My name is Simon Balthazar, and I work with .tz from Tanzania. And it's always difficult to come last because you are preempted. But then again, my contribution in this session will be based on the experience of deploying these technologies at .tz registry. And in the course of doing this, I'll be touching on some of the tooling that we've been using for our deployment, and I'll touch on some of the problems that we encountered along the way when deploying these technologies. The previous speakers spoke about DNSSEC and DANE in depth, and I don't have anything to add on that. But then again, I'll touch a little bit on IPv6. You will wonder, why are we talking about numbering and in a naming in a DNS forum? But then again, as we all know that there is a quick depletion of IPv4 IP addresses, and and if you're not IPv6 ready as a registry or registrar, you're lagging behind, because some of your services that you offer can only be reached on IPv4, which is not compatible with IPv6. There are some users later on who will be coming and trying to connect to your systems using IPv6, and if you don't have it, that means they'll not have service from you. So registries should be the front runners in deploying these technologies like IPv6. and make sure all the services like registration services, the WHOI services, the mail services, and the web DNS services are all available in both IPv6 and IPv4. Also, peering with IPv6 with IXP to make sure that your local community can reach your DNS services at the local IXPs. Yeah, make sure that if you are hosting like some of these root servers, like in .tz we host 2 root servers, the froot by ISC and root by ICANN. Make sure all these root services are available in IPv6 at your local IXP, and you make sure ICANN or ISC, when they want to do management, they can reach you on both protocols. It's very important during this time of transition between the 2 protocols. Also, I'll touch a little bit on DNSSEC, as the previous speakers have talked about. DNSSEC adds a little bit of complexity in management of DNS as we compared it to the traditional DNS, as we have to keep an eye on resource record signatures expiration. We have to make sure that when we sign our zones, the signatures are always up to date, and we keep on resigning them so that they're not outdated, because the moment your signatures are outdated, then your zone becomes bogus, and none of the services that you offer will be reachable then. So it is important to employ some of the tools to help you in the key management. Tools like, for example, the Open DNSSEC. This is the tool that you can use to manage your keys. It can do a lot. The usual re-signing of your zone can be done by using this one. There are some of the functions that you still need to do manually, so and they still have some limitations, so you have to be careful on that one. I'll give an example of some of the limitations that we encountered at TZNIC. Just last year, we decided that we'll be doing algorithm rollover for our keys. This is we are changing the algorithm type of our keys to a different one, and the reason for doing this was, one, because of the deprecation of SHA-1 algorithm is recommended by NIST. So we decided that we'll do away with the SHA-1 that we were using then, and then also migrating to NSEC3. This is a type of resource record that we are using to prevent zone walking. So in the challenges that we encountered when we were doing this was that the Open DNSSEC, the tool that we're using, it had some limitations that you cannot have simultaneously multiple algorithms on the same tool. Okay, so we had to do away with Open DNSSEC and do a manual signing on the side, and then import the keys back into Open DNSSEC. So these are the things you need to be aware before you pick up a tool. You need to do a lot of testing before you start using a tool, and make sure you know all the limitations that are there before you come and use it. At the end of the day, everything went smooth, and we were able to do the migration. Now, deploying and serving these services like Open DNSSEC, like DNSSEC, it's not a challenge if you put your heart to it. But then again, the problem comes in selling and marketing these services, making sure the end users, the registrants, are using these services, because there's no point of a registry having a signed TLD and then you have just a handful of signed zones. That means the end users are not using the service. So at back in TZ, we are having a lot of problems selling the DNSSEC, building a business case. We called the roadshow, came to Tanzania. Yes, Alain was there, and they talked to managers and trying to pass this knowledge to them and tell them the importance of using DNSSEC and why it's important for them to sign their zones and their domains. it has helped a little bit, but then still we are struggling, and we keep on passing this knowledge to registrars and end users, and to make sure that at least this knowledge gap is bridged a little bit to enable them to understand the importance of signing the zone. And then later on, after DNSSEC, then it comes the other technologies that you can use on top of DNSSEC, like DANE, to make sure your websites and your mail servers are encrypted and they can be validated and trusted by your users. So I think that's it.
Round of applause to Balthazar. And I think we want the session to be interactive. I'm sure you have some questions. And so we have the microphone. Yeah, we have the microphone there. So please, you just line up, and then we take all the questions, and we come back to the panelists. Maybe the time you are going to join the queue, I can start asking. I have 2 questions. So from the first presentation, is like also from the end user side, we have something to do regarding DNSSEC. So that is my first question to the first presenter. So as an end user, do we have something to do? I think you mentioned something about our system. And my second question, so if today as an end user I want to get a domain name, so do I need to check if the registry operator of my name, my top level domain, has DNSSEC enabled, something like that? Because there are things we as an end user we don't know. So I want to hear on that. This is my first question, my first 2 questions.
Okay.
And the second, the other question is that is DNSSEC something also we everybody should do? This is a question to the panelists, or is something we can say, oh, we are running developing services. So is it correct? Because my personal opinion is that there's no second level services, so it's the same service. So I want you to comment that, because it's appear that sometimes we are afraid, or we say that okay, we can do that, we cannot do that. So I want to hear on that. So I like Dan to respond, and then you add before we get the question for the floor. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And yes, if you do have questions, we've got a whole bunch of folks up here. Don't let us off that easily. Please come up and ask some questions of us. So to answer one of your questions, you said about should end users consider, what they're, if they're looking for a new domain, then a question is, and if they'd like to be able to provide this higher level of trust on the information they put in, what do they need to look at? And the first thing they need to understand is the TLD under which they want to register the domain, is that TLD signed by the registry? And so for a lot of the typical generic ones, the answer is yes. Alain here actually maintains a great site, DNSSEC-Africa.org. I'll just put a plug in for that site. And on that site, he's got a list of which of the domains, what's the current status of the CCTLDs in here in Africa. And so he's got that list there that is the first step, because if your TLD is not signed, then your domain will not be able to have the protection of DNSSEC. The second step, once your registry or once your TLD is signed, the next question you need to find out is, does your registrar support DNSSEC? Because the registrar has an important piece of it, which is that they have to take, when you've signed it, they have to take this little bit of this one record and pass it up to the registrar, or to the registry, to do the whole global chain of trust. So you need a TLD, a registry that supports DNSSEC, and you need a registrar that supports that. And once you have those 2 pieces, then obviously you need to have, if the registrar provides your DNS, they have to also sign it, or if you sign your own DNS, etc. But you need that, registry and registrar. The other part that you ask about for end users, ideally, end users outside of asking, or looking for this in a domain name, they shouldn't really have to do much else, because they should just be able to get DNSSEC validation from their, whoever does their DNS resolution, their ISP, their network operator, or their own network. And, the signing side of it, ideally, is taken care of for them. One of the registrars I use makes it as easy for me to go and put a little checkbox next to my domain, and it says, I want that signed, and now it goes and does all that for me. Now, to the points made by the other, our folks on here, the monitoring is critical. If you're going to be providing the validation, you're going to be providing signing. Alain mentioned that in some of the cases where people have not set up that monitoring in advance before turning on DNSSEC. And I was being quick here. Alain's got a whole roadshow that goes through this and talks about all the issues and challenges here. And even I said, go home and turn on validation. Well, yes, but be aware that when you do that, if there's a signature error, as the gentleman on the end mentioned, that can cause people not to be able to get to a website. So you need to be ready to answer support calls when somebody says, hey, I can't get to this website on your network, but when I use my mobile phone, which is not doing DNSSEC validation, I can get there. What's wrong? You need to be able to know that it might be because you're providing a higher level of security than the mobile phone operator. But you have to know that to be able to do that. But in the ideal world, I think that the end user should simply have to ask their ISP, are you giving me DNSSEC validation? Can I get this higher level of trust in DNS? And to the registrar or registry, can I use this? Can I get my domain signed that way? I think Alain wants to.
Yeah, maybe before going back to the panel, I'll take the question for the ladies and gentlemen, and then we come back to you. So,
okay. Bonjour, je suis Roque Diata du NIC SN.
2 minutes pour que les...
My question is to Alain. He addressed the incidents, 2 major incidents that took place. Could you please discuss them with us a little further, because we are implementing DNSSEC and we wouldn't encounter these sorts of problems, and if we do come across them or come across these types of incidents, how can we resolve them? Pouvez-vous répéter la question parce que je ne l'ai pas entendue. Prochaine question. Bonjour. Merci beaucoup pour les présentations. Je m'appelle M. Mangui de Internet Society. J'ai 2 questions. La première, elle s'adresse d'abord à Simon, mais aussi les autres panélistes qui ont...
That we are trying to, has had a challenge with its DNS signing procedure. By virtue of where I come from, you sort of have an idea. And we are trying to find a way of building confidence within the community based on the experiences we had, and by that I mean the outage that we had because of DNSSEC. And I'm looking to learn that how have you been able to build confidence within your registrars, within your community on DNSSEC? I'm looking for a process, especially with the DNSSEC signing, like what Simon has explained with respect to transition from one algorithm to another, from SHA-1 to SHA-2 or 256. I don't know which one you went to. But did you involve the community in any way to get that process? Is the community confident of what the CCTLD is doing with respect to DNSSEC, so that the registrars themselves also feel that they actually need to implement this, because even if I have a problem, then I have a registry that I can go to that can actually help me out in this process. And how do you bring them on board? And I'm using this with the thought that if you see what ICANN did with respect to the signing of the root, the entire community was involved with the TCRs, where Alain is one of them. And that gave us a lot of confidence, coming from the DNS community, that we should also sign, because, ICANN has this elaborate process where we are all part of. Has there been any CCTLD that has gone through such a process and that involves the community, and what's the impact of that with respect to the community, the registrar's uptake of DNSSEC? That's number one. Number two goes to the second part, which is the validation. Now, we tend to, in all these discussions, leave out the operators. And as a result, most of the operators don't have validating resolvers. Now, at what stage will we bring them on board? Because this entire discussion tends to happen between registries and registrars. But in our space, especially in Africa, for a long time, the registrars were the ISPs. But that's not the case anymore. At least in my region, the registrars who are ISPs are losing their market share to the small operators who are just now DNS providers or hosting providers. So if most of us as end users are using resolvers that are on operator networks, when will we bring them on board on the issue of validation? Now, why is this important? In the case that we had in Kenya, the reason why many people experienced a major outage was because majority of the people in Kenya tend to use 8.8.8 as their resolver, because the ISP's DNS caching resolvers don't work. So because they don't work, everybody uses 8.8.8, and when there was a problem with DNSSEC on the .ke, most of the people experienced an outage. And those who had their own that were non-validated then didn't seem to have a problem. So here is a catch-22. At what point will we actually bring in these operators? Because once they understand DNSSEC and the value of validating resolvers, then we will have a stronger ecosystem or community behind DNSSEC, and maybe we might start seeing more value or benefit coming out of it. So sorry for the length of my questions, but I hope you got the question.
Okay, we have one last question, but I want to add a small part of question to what Michuki said. And then, Alain, I would like, before you respond, to inform us, when we talk about the ceremony, signing ceremony, maybe in 2 minutes you can inform us about what it is. And then, as he said, is it something in our community? Is this something we can also do in our community? So, when we are responding. So, Patrick, please.
Ok, bonsoir. Moi, c'est Patrick. Je suis de l'unique Côte d'Ivoire. Ma question... en Côte d'Ivoire, nous sommes sur 2 chevaux.
PPC and the implementation of DNSSEC. So my question is addressed to all the experts. So which one am I going to choose in order to be more efficient? I don't know if my question is properly understood. You are saying what is the priority in order to be more efficient. Okay, that's fine. Une dernière question pour laisser les membres du panel répondre. Veuillez vous présenter d'abord. Je vais parler en français. I'm Olivier from Web Generation Morocco. I'd like to know, for countries that want to implement the DNSSEC, does ICANN or ISOC plan, or are they planning to assist them if there's a request from those countries? and help them to improve their infrastructure.
Okay, merci.
Okay, thank you. Alain, vous avez parlé.
This ceremony, what is it about?
Okay, so the key ceremony, maybe I need to give a brief explanation of how the root, DNSSEC at roots is designed. Everybody here, I guess, knows that VeriSign is the root zone maintainer. So VeriSign maintains the root zone. And for deploying DNSSEC at root, the agreement was that I can manage the KSK, the key sign key, and VeriSign manage the zone sign key, which is used to sign the zone. Okay, and then because both keys, the KSK and ZSK, need to be signed by the KSK, okay, so there is time where we need to get both ZSK and KSK to be signed by the KSK. And the KSK system designed by ICANN is a complete offline system which use a hardware security module, and the whole system use multi-safes, physical securities, also embedded, and then everything happened in at two places in the US, one East Coast, one East Coast, one West Coast. The authentication system use what we call M of N. So the authentication information needed to activate the hardware security module is split, okay, on 7 smart cards. And when you have 3 of them, you can operate the system. And ICANN decided to, because to build for the trust on the system, because Michuki was talking about the trust. So how do you build the trust? Building trust here is about getting the community, the stakeholders involved. Say what you do what, so and prove it exactly. So there is a process, and this ceremony involves a representative from community, what we call TCR, Community Trusted Representative, has been selected in 2010, okay? And then when we have ceremony, the 7 keys have been split among the TCR. So for example, I have a key. I have a physical key. I have a key at home. And then that key, the key I have, when we go for ceremony, I use the key to open a box. There, in that box, I have the smart card. I have my smart card, okay? And then when we go to ceremony, okay, we need to have 3 crypto officers, 3 people with to bring very physical key to open the box, then take out the smart card. Then with these 3 people, then we can activate the engine and then sign the key. So at every quarter, I can organize a ceremony, one at the East Coast and the following at the West Coast. And during that ceremony, what do? We just take the offline system, we put the hardware security module on, follow a script, a strict script, and VeriSign bring ZSK for the coming weeks. And the end goal of the ceremony is to sign the key set, both KSK and ZSK. Then we output the signed resource record to VeriSign, then VeriSign take home, and then put them in the zone and sign and publish the root zone. Okay, so now this process is open process. You can participate physically, or there is a direct streaming that anyone can follow, and there are also archive of the video you can follow. So this is basically what I post. Then all of this information are available if you go to IANA website and click on the DNSSEC. You must be able.
Yes, so when you go to the IANA website, you can, it is good to go and watch some of the recording of the ceremony. But after I'm done, Alain, I want you to answer the second part of the question. Is this something we can also do in our community? So I want you to talk about that after I'm done respond to some of the questions.
Well, so let me just put in a plug for any of you who are here at the ICANN meeting on Wednesday. there will be a DNSSEC workshop that happens. It starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's a 6-hour workshop. You don't have to come for all of it, but at one point in the agenda, we're actually having a session precisely on this. Dr. Eberhard Lisse from Namibia will be speaking about some of the processes that they've come up with around signing. Alain, you're also going to be speaking a bit about the signing software that you have as well. So this topic will be covered in a bit more detail there for people who want to come, and it's on the ICANN agenda. It's there. I will mention this. The process Alain just outlined is what ICANN uses, because they have to really have this high level of trust in the root key. But if you go out and look, there's something called a DNSSEC practice and policy statement, or it's a DPS they're called. You can find these documents for top level domains, and they outline the steps that different TLDs have gone through. You don't necessarily have to have the same level of assurance that ICANN has for the root key, but they do show you the level that you can go and do. Two quick responses, and I'll turn it to Alain on there. The gentleman from Côte d'Ivoire who asked about NSEC versus NSEC 3, we can have a conversation about that, and certainly we're looking at ways to be more efficient and to work with things. There's another part of the DNSSEC workshop on Wednesday that will be talking about new encryption algorithms that can make DNSSEC packet sizes smaller, which can let us go and do this. And there's some rollout issues and pieces around that. The one other piece, the gentleman from Morocco, I think it was, who was asking about, is there support for TLDs that want to provide this? And absolutely. Alain has the DNSSEC Roadshow that goes around and does this. ICANN also provides training, or is that really the Roadshow, right? That's okay. The training that is provided directly if it is requested. So if you request that, you can get that training, that Roadshow, to come to your space and do that. Rick Lamb is somebody I've been working with who goes around and does a lot of that. The other thing, Machuki, on the operator side, absolutely, getting the operators on board is a key part of what we've been looking at on a global level. And part of that in our space has been going and talking, for instance, at some of the operator group meetings where the network operators are. And so when I go there and I talk about some of this, I'm talking about what are the steps of validation, what are the things they have to care about, and why should they do this, and how can they work with it. But absolutely, we have to be reaching out to the operators, because otherwise we just get a lot of signatures with nobody checking them. So we are looking at that. In some parts of Europe, like in Slovenia, where they recently did some of this last year or so, they got a lot of the network operators together and said, how are we going to work together to make sure that validation occurs during this time? And so there was some direct intervention or interaction with the operators to go and do that. But it's absolutely, that is important at this point in time. I'll pass it along to others here.
Maybe them before. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just to respond to Michuki's question on building confidence of the community, all right, the processes have been explained on how the route is done, but for the top level, it can be a little bit different. We have what we call a DNSSEC practice statement, which we usually publish on our website. For .tz, it's there on tznic.tra.tz, which explain how we handle the keys, how we manage them, and how we keep them. But most important, when you are dealing with the community, you have to involve them from the very beginning of the process when you are planning to deploy DNSSEC, and you have to involve them. You need to have a stakeholders meeting. You call all of them, the operators and everyone. This is where you can talk even about the validation with the operators. So you have to involve them from the very beginning of the process, so that you're moving with them along the way throughout the whole process. This way you can build confidence and trust, and they can have an understanding of exactly what you're doing. And it can be an easy way of you pushing the service when you're done deploying the service. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that DNSSEC, from the little that I got to know over the last few months, is extremely sensitive to the slightest error. You snooze, you lose. And that's why I had to put the monitoring part in my presentation, because we had an incident where, because we were not monitoring the DNSSEC service itself, we thought everything was working. But we were serving for 7 days the same zone. Okay? So you have to increase your vigilance, otherwise it's going to break. That's what I want to say.
We have Michuki.
I have to answer the Senegal.
Yeah.
So don't put me in trouble. Hein? Oui, la dame du Sénégal a demandé si je peux élaborer un peu plus sur les incidents qui a eu lieu. Et comme vient de dire,
said, the DNSSEC, whatever we say, can bring about some complexity. We bring about encryption, the keys, etc. In the first case, the case of Kenya, there was bad management of the keys. So the system that I was used was island signing. The system gave the warning, but there was no follow-up, and the system withdrew the key for the signing of the zone, and it broke the chain. So IANA had a DS that was pointing to a key that had disappeared. The key was at the bottom, but the DNS was not sent to the top. So in both cases, in Botswana, it was slightly different. It was about the signature. They had a signature for a couple of days, and they were closed during the Christmas time. There was a problem on the signature platform. The signatures were not refreshed. So at a certain stage, the signatures or the zone became obsolete, basically. So we have an example of different problems that led to the same result. The TLDs were not accessible anymore. So in order to avoid that, we needed to have the monitoring tools, publish the DPS, which is the document that explains how to proceed, and look at DPS of the route. The route has a DPS that explains how the route takes your DS and how to interact with the route in case of emergency. All this procedure is described. So you have to look at the route DPS and include that in your procedure, so that in case of a problem, you know how to contact, first of all, IANA. But if you don't have a mail, the emergency procedures are available also. All that is described in the DPS, the route, and you also have to adopt that in your community. That's more or less what I can say. Now, to add, pour ajouter à ce que Mashuki a dit, comme ça il va partir du micro.
About creating a trust. How do you get the people to trust these things, especially where we go beyond the DNSSEC and we are saying that we are using DANE, we are using a certificate, we are using, so people trust the current PKI system. So how do these people trust our DNSSEC security system? So we have to build trust to the same level like what we have with the certificate things, but in the certificate world, sometimes money is involved. Sometimes they have liability. In this DNSSEC, we're not taking liability in terms of insurance, in terms of paying money, but we will build such trust by being transparent, by following rules, practice, process, publishing DPS involving communities. Then people can trust.
So it's really about building that trust. And the trust, this trust, you cannot build it by just hiding and say, you trust. No. You must trust Simon because Simon is a strong man, you must trust. No, it's not that. Someone must tell us what you do and prove it. This is very important. I think it's part of, so this is what I want to add. So do you still want to go again?
I think Mishuki want to add more. So you have the floor. Do we have other more questions? If you have questions, you can join the queue. So if Mishuki can go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I have a random thought, and this is on the validation side, and it links to V6. For V6 to work the way things have, it has been made to be, once you activate V6, services will try to default to V6. What I haven't seen is, and I have no particular attack on any particular application, is a validating resolver application that does that by default. You sort of have to go into the config and enable validation. What would happen if we had this by default, that if you install bind and unbound, whatever, it attempts to validate unless you disable it, as opposed to the way it is now that you have to enable it. Of course, there is a challenge to that, but I believe probably we can find a solution. But that's my number one question.
Okay, so I can answer it quickly. Is that that's happening in a number of the different things. I think it's the latest version of Fedora, for instance, is coming out with bind enabled to do. Well, whichever, I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly which DNSSEC resolver they're using in there, but whichever one it is, it's coming out. Paul Vouchers is going to be upset with me, and I'll see him on Wednesday, but whichever version it is coming out, and it will be enabled by default. And so we're seeing that in some of the different operating systems. Some of the variants of Linux are starting to do that. And some ISPs are doing it. You know, the mention was here of Google's public DNS, the 8.8.8.8. And VeriSign now has a public DNS out, and there's a couple others that are all doing DNSSEC validation by default as well. And so anybody, you know, as the issue was mentioned here, you know, the validation is happening already because people are using things such as Google's DNS server to do that, and others are ISPs are starting to do that by default. But it is happening in the operating systems as well. It'll take a while.
And allow me to add, as he said, it's already happening. Then in most of the bind U-bound setup now, validation is automatic. But the good things now, the validation has moved to the auto mode, where the validator are able now to track the root key. Because remember that we are about to change the root key.
Yes.
So validation mode, moving the validation to the auto mode is also important. Then when we change the root key, so we won't see much failure. So thank you.
Okay, so that was my first question. Now my second question is, and I like the work that has been done here. I have to thank ICANN and Alain, who I know is behind this as well, for keeping us honest in terms of keeping track of what's going on. Now, here's something I would be curious to see. Of the 14 that CCTLDs that have the DS on the root, how many of them actually have IPv6? And I am pretty sure you will find it's less than the 14. The question is why?
So I think the CC guy who should speak now.
Guilty. Having said that, for us, IPv6 has been on the agenda for a long time. We come from ZICTA is basically the regulator in Zambia, and we now manage the .zm CCTLD. And we now intend to do IPv6. Simon may confirm that I, last year in October, November, actually asked him how I would do it, even though traditionally all the ISPs are still running IPv4. So I'll only try and speak for Zambia. The others will have an opportunity to defend themselves.
Not guilty. We are doing IPv6 since 2010. I think we did it before even up DNSSEC, and we can be reached by IPv6 on all our services, the DNS, registration, and tools, everything.
I think one answer to that, too, Machuki, that I've seen from some other, because I also have been pushing IPv6 in places, but in some cases, the CCCLD, so said DNSSEC is actually easier to implement, because on one level, they just have to change the resolvers on one space and then get into the signing for the DNS hosting operator. So on one level, there's pieces that the operator has more control over. Rather than with IPv6, it's more systemic that they have to go and implement it in across their whole infrastructure and the pieces there. Whereas with DNSSEC, they just have to touch the DNS side of that. And so it's an easier lift for them in some cases to go and do that. I would also encourage people too, if you're going to be here for the ICANN meeting, if you want to know more about DNSSEC, there's a whole tutorial happening on Sunday in the afternoon. It's at 16:45 to 18:15. There's the DNSSEC for Everybody, a beginner's guide, where we have a session that goes through a lot of this. And we actually, you may laugh at this, but there's a whole little skit that acts out DNS and DNSSEC. And it's actually quite useful for people trying to understand how does this all work. So there's an opportunity there to go in to dive deeper if you'd like to as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we don't have... there's no more question from the floor. I just have one question, and then the panelists will maybe to answer my question, and then say the final word. So my question is just a direct question. Today we are talking about DNSSEC. Is it a choice for our CCTLDs? Is it a question of choice, or they have to go for it? Personally, sometimes when we talk about DNSSEC, it's like when we have our students after in the middle of the secondary school, they have a choice between mathematics or literatures, and most of them, they are afraid to go to mathematics in the Francophone system. You call C, Series C or D. So some people are afraid to go there. But you can see people going there, they do mathematics. So sometimes it's like people are afraid of DNSSEC, and this is my feeling. So my question, do we have to go? If I'm a CCTLD, is it an option, or I have to go? Because I'm sure in each of the countries we have people who can deal with this thing. So this is my question. I want you to tell me if it is a choice or if you can go. And then you talk about backup in the presentation of Choolwe. My question is that from the experience, the backup, most of the time people just do backup, but you can be in a system where you never have problem for 3-4 years, but you are doing backup. So how do we deal with backup? Is there a way we have to test this backup from time to time? If not, we're doing backup, but the day we want to use the backup, I don't know. So I have 2 questions. So I give you the floor from my right, and then you answer the question, and you... Thank you very much. So we start by Balthazar. Thank you.
All right. Is it a must? I'll say yes, where we're going DNSSEC for registries, and in order for DNS to be trusted, we have to deploy DNSSEC, and have to deploy it good. We have to make it work in a way that it cannot break. But before you jump into DNSSEC, please make sure you're very conversant with how DNS itself works before you go to DNSSEC. So that's very important. And the moment you deploy DNS, everything will be smooth. It's not the rocket science, but it's very easy. So it's very important. I think it's a must for each and every registry to deploy DNSSEC. That's why even all the GTLD that are coming up now, it's in the ICANN policy that they have to be DNSSEC ready. So you can see the importance of our CCs to be DNSSEC ready. And the second question was... About backup, yes. Backup, you have to test your backups, I think, every now and then. You need to schedule these tests and make sure your backup is working, and do a swap to your backup site to make sure it's working every now and then. You need to have it in your policies. I think it's something to do with your IT policies, but testing your backup is a must so that you are not in shock when the real things happen. Yeah.
Okay, so is DNSSEC a must? It's a big yes. The reason I say this is because where we're going, especially if DANE does successfully take over or overthrow a hostile takeover of SSL, DNSSEC is going to be the reason why DANE succeeds. So DNSSEC is a must. It should be implemented. When it comes to backup, I didn't want to go into details as to the processes of backing up, but yes, backup should be tested. And in my opinion, starting small is just to back up the registry database, and then you can build processes. You can actually go for ISO 27001 certification if you want to go the whole 9 yards.
So yes, I have plus multiple one for DNSSEC. That DNSSEC is a must, because these days we need trust, and we are working to provide confidentialities, and then we must welcome the DNS and DANE by giving us the trust and enabling us to authenticate people, and knows then to do encryption. So then for me, DNSSEC is a must. So I won't talk backup, because I think these two guys issue of validation, and I wanted to say that when we do the DNSSEC roadshow, it's a 3 days event. The first days is awareness, and we make sure that in a room we have the ISPs, all the local community players, including those who will be doing the validation, where we discuss, because the validation is is important. And then day 2, when we do the technical day, we also, the first labs we do is the validation, to make sure that, because when you finish talking about DNSSEC, the first thing you could do is show people DNSSEC validation auto, where are the key, and look for ADB. So the first thing we're trying to do for the validation before we go into the sign-in and then to the sign-in and other things. So yes, and Wednesday we have this DNSSEC workshop. We'll discuss more, and so I'll stop there. I'll stop there for now.
So I guess I would just say I totally agree with Simon over there on the backup, and Choolwe on the backup, and the need to restore them. I mean, if you don't try a restoration, there's no point in having a backup, really, other than to make yourself feel good that maybe it's there, but you have to do that. But on DNSSEC, the question of is it a choice, the reality is that there's a lot of folks who are looking at how do we restore or promote a higher level of trust in the internet. This entire conference is here about the role that the internet has played and is coming to play in the economies of Africa, of all the countries across here, and in the world. And we're seeing, the internet has become a part of the fabric of our society, and we have to trust that. And, really, Choolwe hit the point earlier when he talked about defense in depth and layers of security. There's a lot of layers that we have to look at in the internet. We're here talking about DNS, and that's one layer. We have to also look at the routing infrastructure and ways to secure that and make that more trusted. And there's a program out there called Manners, which is looking at how we go and do that. There's application level, which is the TLS, which is the piece that are there. DNS provides a critical hook through all of that. And so in order to bring about a fully open and trusted internet, we do need trust in the DNS. And so we need to have DNS and DNSSEC for that. The other point, I would just go off of what Simon said, you know, from a CCTLD perspective, the reality today is that people have a lot of options for TLDs. They have a lot of choice now because of the new GTLD program, because of that. And they need, you know, as companies understand the value of having more security in DNS, as they're looking for pieces like that, that all the new GTLDs do have to be signed at the TLD level. You know, whether or not they're, you know, fully supported below that is a different issue, but they have to be there. And so your CCTLD misses out on being as secure as the newer GTLDs. So there's a competitive reason to look at that as well. If you're looking for local content, to encourage local content using local TLDs, then you need to be sure that your CCTLD can operate at the level that are other ones that are there. Choolwe mentioned DANE and this ability to provide a DANE can work and support the existing CA system. It's not it doesn't have to be a replacement, but can work with that and just provide a higher level of trust. But for that, it needs DNSSEC. For that, it needs that. I'll also say on Wednesday, if you come, you'll see some maps that we put out showing the DNSSEC deployment around the world. And we, the Internet Society, produce those every Monday. And right now, Africa has a lot of areas that are gray, unsigned. I would love to hope that when I come back to the 5th Africa DNS Forum next year, we'd be able to show a lot more green in that the map of Africa and be able to show that, because bringing that level up there. So I guess I would just end by saying, you know, thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak. I'll be around, others will be around, we'll be here this week. But I'd ask you, please, look at how you can, you know, learn from the examples here, the other pieces. Help all of us bring about this more secure, more trusted internet by looking at how do we make DNS more secure. Thank you.
Alain, one last word you want to?
Yes, I want to add something on the IPv4, IPv6 part. Just to tell people that right now at Afrinic, we are discussing how we manage the remaining V4 in Afrinic Pole, where we are now preparing, or we are moving to IPv6. There are policy discussion going on. So I want to invite the TRD, the CC people here to follow what is going on there and contribute. So because as Michuki mentioned here, then DNSSEC is one thing, but making sure that our CC are prepared to for DNSSEC is also critical. And this how we manage the remaining pool of V4 to allow us to have a peaceful migration to IPv6, I think is also critical. So I invite all of us to follow the discussion going on Afrinic policy and resource development, and to contribute. And we will continue the discussion up to Gaborone, and we expect to have a decision on the policy in Gaborone. So thank you.
Okay, so we thank all the experts. So the lesson from this session is we have to go for DNSSEC, and we learn also we have to go, but we have to be prepared. And I'm sure we have all the resources to be prepared, as all the partners, ISOC, ICANN, FTLD, we have a lot of resources, human resources, and information on the various websites to move to internet security tools, especially to DNSSEC. So as a reminder again, we have some sessions during the ICANN meeting on DNSSEC, and then it will be good to attend this session. So I think to close the session, I will invite you all to give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.